Good evening, everyone. I declare the Council Members' Briefing session open at 6 p.m. Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting is being held today on Wajak Noongar Boodja, and I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I thank all past and present members of the community that have supported the city to better understand and value Noongar culture within the city. It is with deep sadness that I share the news that Councillor Chris Baker passed away. Elected as North Ward Councillor in 2019, Chris was a passionate community representative and worked alongside fellow councillors and the city to help build a thriving community for local people. On behalf of the Wanneroo Council and City, I share thoughts and prayers with Chris's wife Sarah, his family and friends at this very sad time, and I ask all present to stand for 1 minute's silence in recognition and respect of Councillor Chris Baker. Thank you. You may be seated. Please note that the audio-visual proceedings of tonight's meeting will be live broadcast online, with the exception of matters discussed behind closed doors. The broadcast of the proceedings of this meeting can be accessed live and on demand through the City of Wanneroo YouTube channel. Attendances are as per the record, and I have an apology from Deputy Mayor Councillor Treby. We have a new member of our council here tonight. I'd just like to acknowledge Vicky Cole, who is our new Executive Manager of Governance and Legal, and I just want to welcome you and thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see you tonight. So every one of our councillors, I'm sure, will make you welcome, as well as all of the staff here at the City. So item 3, deputations. Deputations are to be presented during the briefing session at item 3 in the order of business. Deputations must relate to a report on the current briefing session agenda. A deputation is not to exceed 3 speakers in number, and only those speakers may address the council members. Speakers of a deputation will collectively have a maximum of up to 10 minutes, dependent on the number of deputations received, to address the council members, unless an extension of time is granted. A deputation is to be in the form of a statement, and no debate or discussion on the matter is to occur. Questions from council members relating to the subject matter should be reserved until the administration has presented on the relevant report during the meeting. However, a point of clarification by a council member on a specific statement may be permitted. There is an opportunity for public question time for members of the public at item 7 in the order of business. So first of all, we have item 4.5, consideration of local development plan number 24, Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre, following advertising. And the speakers on the first deputation is Mr Tom Barry, Mr Cole Dutton and Mr Damien Shepherd. Thank you. If you'd just like to come to the podium and tell us your name and the suburb where you live. Thank you.
hear me? Yep. Thanks, Mayor Aitken and councillors. My name's Tom Barry, live in Wembley Downs. I'm a Senior Development Manager at Stockland. We're making this deputation in respect of item 4.5 on the agenda, which is consideration of Local Development Plan number 24, the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre. Stockland, along with our development partner, Eglinton Estates, are developing the Amberton Beach community, which is located directly west of Eglinton Village. Stockland does not support the proposed LDP number 24 for the following reasons. A planned hierarchy of activity centres in Eglinton is clearly established by the approved structure plan. Number 82, both the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre and the Amberton Beach Neighbourhood Centre are allocated a maximum floor space of 2,051 square metres net lettable area pursuant to the approved structure plan. The intent of the retail hierarchy and floor space restrictions is for the two neighbourhood centres to complement the Eglinton District Activity Centre, located only a short distance to the north. The intent of the maximum floor space of 2,051 square metres was for both the Amberton Beach and Eglinton Village neighbourhood centres to provide for a small supermarket-based centre, consistent with their classification as neighbourhood centres, which are appropriate in the context of the proximity to the future Eglinton District Centre. Amberton Beach commenced in 2012, and to date we've sold over 1,700 lots, and there's over 3,500 residents living there currently. Amberton Beach is expected to be completed in the next 5 to 7 years and ultimately comprise of over 2,500 lots. We've held discussions with supermarket operators, and they've cited population as being a critical factor in regards to the viability of the Amberton Beach Neighbourhood Centre, given it does not front Marmion Avenue, rather is located in the heart of our project, approximately 1 kilometre from Marmion. Given the maturing nature of the Amberton Beach project and the expected additional number of residents that will be living at the development in the next few years, the delivery of our neighbourhood centre is becoming a commercially viable option from a supermarket operator perspective. Eglinton Village's neighbourhood centre is located directly adjacent to Marmion Avenue, and if approved and constructed in the short term, consistent with Local Development Plan number 24, which proposes a total net lettable area of 3,250 square metres, would ultimately result in a significant delay to the delivery of a small supermarket and specialty shops at Amberton Beach. Discussions with the potential operators have indicated their preference to operate from the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre in the short term in comparison to Amberton Beach, given the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre abuts Marmion Avenue. Given the likelihood that the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre will be developed prior to the Amberton Beach Centre, it should be developed consistent with the current approved maximum floor space of 2,051 square metres rather than the proposed 3,250. This will enable a small supermarket and specialty shops to be provided for their future residents. This in turn would enable Amberton Beach Neighbourhood Centre to be developed in a significant shorter time frame for our 3,500 plus residents compared to if LDP number 24 was approved and a mid-sized supermarket of 2,400 square metres was constructed, noting that a mid-sized supermarket would service a significantly greater catchment in comparison to a small supermarket offering. Based on the above information, we respectfully request the Council refuse Local Development Plan number 24. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Are you the only speaker for that deputation? Thank you. Okay, we have a second deputation on item 4.5, consideration of Local Development Plan number 24, Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre, following advertising. And the speakers are Mr Ben Rosser and Mr Daniel Martinovich. Thank you. Could you come up and give us your name and the suburb you live in? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Ben Rosser. I'm the State Manager for Cedar Woods, and I live in Floreat here in WA. So tonight I'll be talking to in support of item 4.5, which is the Local Development Plan for Eglinton Village. Dan Martinovich from CLE, who is our planning consultant for the project, will be talking to planning matters and also the gravity modelling, and then I'll finish up with a final summation. Just briefly, so Cedar Woods, we are an ASX listed property developer. We operate in 4 states here in Australia. We have 12 trading projects in the Perth-Peel region, plus 1 in the southwest. We are residential, commercial and retail shopping centre developers. Eglinton Village was acquired by Cedar Woods in late 2021 and was quickly launched to market earlier this year. Ultimately, it'll be home to 1,200 residents, which will be sold over a 12-year duration, which is the life of the project. The village will include a primary school. There'll be 4 hectares of retained vegetation, plus public open space. We have an innovative microgrid that we're installing into the project, which will be to the benefit of all of our residents through cheaper power costs. And ultimately, those benefits will also flow through to the neighbourhood shopping centre to be developed upon the site. So tonight we're seeking support from the City of Wanneroo councillors in support of your administration officer's recommendation to approve the LDP for the Eglinton Village Shopping Centre. Gravity modelling that's been completed by Cedar Woods and has been affirmed by the City of Wanneroo's own modelling shows the unfulfilled retail demand in this locality, which exists right now, which is only getting worse with the rapid population growth of the Northwest Corridor. We'll elaborate a bit further on the gravity modelling later in the presentation. Aware that the neighbourhood village, the centre is coming, all of our residents at Eglinton Village have shown strong interest in the centre. There's been intense interest in the neighbourhood centre from major supermarket operators, which include Woolworths, Coles and Metcash. It's a desirable site in terms of access, the catchment, exposure, and the current unmet demand has been identified by the operators who have conducted their own gravity modelling in addition to that that's been completed by ourselves. While a retail cap for the site will allow the placement of a medium-sized supermarket, it will not allow for the inclusion of additional service offerings such as specialty retail, personal services and cafe restaurants. Significant work has been undertaken to progress the neighbourhood centre to this point, including preliminary centre design and lodgement of a subdivision application. The formal commitment of a supermarket operator to this development is expected imminently. Cedar Woods has worked closely with the supermarkets to identify the minimum amount of retail floor space that's necessary for a neighbourhood centre to be viable and have worked to that. We've not sought to inflate the amount of retail space that we're asking an approval for, as we're conscious of other planned centres and respecting the hierarchy that's led by the district centre. We've taken a minimalist approach and are proposing only what is needed to accommodate a neighbourhood centre that can succeed and attract a supermarket anchor tenant and provide for the needs of the community. As is clearly evident on the site, we've moved swiftly in the development of Eglinton Village, and the civil works that will support the neighbourhood centre will be completed by this Christmas. I'll now hand you over to Daniel Martinovich, who'll talk to planning and the gravity model matters. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Martinovich, Principal Planner at CLE Town Planning of Design of 2 Abbotsford Street in West Liverpool and presenting in support of the officer recommendation this evening. By way of background, the agreed structure plan was approved by the City in 2012 and it's identified a neighbourhood centre in the proposed location for the last decade. Neighbourhood centres are planned to function as local focal points that provide for the daily and weekly shopping needs of the community, as well as community facilities and a small range of other convenience services. Our proposal to increase the permissible floor space is necessary in order for the centre to fulfil this function. The 2,051 square metre floor space cap has existed since 2012, with the potential need to modify the permissible retail floor space foreseen at that time. Provisions were written into the structure plan to enable the permissible floor space to be increased through an LDP process, and this is the process we've followed and which we are seeking Council's support for. The nature of retail trade has changed significantly since the retail cap was established in 2012. Bricks and mortar retail is increasingly needing to innovate to compete with online shopping, with centres having to reinvent themselves as destinations to attract visitors by offering services and experiences that people cannot access online. This involves the grouping of multiple retail and service offerings together, such as shopping at the supermarket, combined with visits to the chemist, hair salons, beauticians, etc. Cafes and restaurants also provide unique experiences that are not available online, making them essential components of modern activity centres, and this has been a particular focus of this LDP proposal. All of these components are necessary for a modern activity centre, and in a commercial sense, these can't be delivered within the current 2,051 square metre floor space cap, meaning that a modest increase is required. A critical consideration from a planning perspective is the fact that we're not proposing to alter the activity centre hierarchy. The structure plan identifies a neighbourhood centre, and we are proposing a neighbourhood centre. The WAPC's planning policy for centres is premised upon an established principle that competition between centres should not determine outcomes. The key objective in planning for activity centres is to ensure the proposals do not have an adverse impact on the extent and adequacy of facilities and services to the local community. This proposal achieves that objective by significantly improving the locality's access to services and amenities, which are currently non-existent and will not exist in the timeframe that matches population growth in the area. There is a need for a neighbourhood centre in this location now. The locality is currently devoid of access to services and amenities, with the nearest supermarkets located at Alkimos Beach, approximately 3 kilometres to the south, and Yanchep 6 kilometres to the north. As mentioned in the council report, the LDP will also be a tool to coordinate the future development of the site. The plan itself demonstrates the level of thought and detail that's been invested in this proposal and is informed by numerous design iterations prepared by the project architect and represents a well-considered and responsive layout. A key design element of the centre is its connection with the adjoining area of public open space. The project vision is to integrate the village plaza and the associated food and beverage offerings with the adjoining public open space, which Cedar Woods is also responsible for delivering. Linkages through the site and the public open space will create a movement network that encourages residents to walk and cycle to the centre, as well as families to enjoy a meal or a coffee, with children having access to the adjoining playground. Providing these experiences are important components of contemporary living and assist to create great places for people to live. With reference now to the retail impact test that supports the LDP proposal, a detailed retail analysis was undertaken by our retail consultants, Praxis, who are specialists in this area, and the work was undertaken to determine the potential impacts on other centres within a 5 kilometre radius. In this regard, the proposal demonstrates that the impacts are well within established tolerances for what's accepted as a reasonable impact. As outlined in the administration's report, this has been confirmed by the city's independent retail consultant as part of the city's own overall retail needs assessment. Our retail consultant uses a tried and tested methodology to examine the demand for retail floor space, which is accepted by the state government and which we understand is also used by the city's retail consultant. In terms of the potential impacts raised by objectors, our modelling shows that by 2025, only medium impacts are foreseen, and even at the lower end in terms of the scale of reference within the state government's activity centre planning policy. The initial impacts on centres are mitigated.
Excuse me, Mr Martinovich, I just want to let you know you've only got 30 seconds left of your 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. The potential impacts are mitigated by 2030 by population growth, with turnover increasing for all centres by that time. Both the proposed neighbourhood centre, the Eglinton District Centre and Amberton are viable at their full sizes by 2030, which is the medium-term horizon that we've modelled. In terms of roles and functions, the neighbourhood centre is complementary with the Eglinton District Centre and the Amberton Neighbourhood Centre, and they'll fulfil different catchments based on their different exposures and transport methods of access. I'll just pass to Ben if you can fit anything in.
Time is granted. I'll give you another 20 seconds, so make it quick, Mr Rotter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm appreciative. So look, in summation, there's currently unfilled retail demand within this locality. We've moved swiftly in the development of Eglinton Village, and we're in a position to be able to deliver this. We've got the capability to do that. Residents, both within Eglinton Village and outside, are calling for the delivery of this centre. The gravity modelling that's been commissioned shows that this centre can happily coexist with all other centres in the locality.
Mr Rosser, your time is finished now. Thank you. Okay, our third deputation this evening is from Mr Tim Scarrett, and it's about item 4.10, Flynn Drive duplication, community engagement results and next steps. Mr Scarrett, could you please tell us your name and the suburb you live in? Thank you.
Yes, Tim Scarrett. Please. Can you hear me there? Okay, just thanks for the invitation or the allowing me to speak. Thoughts on two matters: the Flynn Drive work, Flynn Tranquil extension widening of the road, and the actual closure or keeping Tranquil Drive as it is already. Firstly, the Flynn Drive work, a thought of ours that relates to my request for some lateral thinking around these plans. 8 properties from Bridle Path at the end of Greenhaven to Tranquil Flynn over many years have put in their own soil tree barriers along Flynn Drive to help with noise reduction and the view of the industrial area, which is giving off increasing light and noise. Work plans to add to this, as we know will happen, combined with some lush bush tree planting on top of a 3-metre soil platform along the blocks that abut Flynn, if nicely done, could serve as an efficient green noise reducer and animal bird supporter without having to resort to the concrete ghetto enclosures that are springing up all over our lovely city. There will be an abundance of soil from roadworks and ample limestone from the quarry, the adjacent long-term quarry across the road, all assisting in cost reduction, I would suggest. This idea, combined with a road plan for this section that uses non-round green islands to slow and control traffic at the various intersections, would also reduce the need for petty, silly traffic lights that do little other than annoy people. Please confirm that our little bridle path is being considered also at the end of Greenhaven. Add this to the discussion. I'm happy to explain in more detail if anyone wants me to. Tranquil, my submission is that we keep it restricted as it is. Regret will follow a thoroughfare. The form of isolation that we have helps to safeguard this little bit of greenery for winged 2- and 4-legged creatures, and we don't need street lights or any heavy traffic. Please. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr Scarrett. Our fourth speaker is Tracy Klonowski, and on item 4.10, Flynn Drive duplication community engagement results. Thank you, Ms Klonowski. If you could mention your name and your suburb, please.
I'm Tracy Klonowski. I live in Carrama, and I'm also a member of the Queen's Rock Environmental Group. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you for letting me speak on this matter. So I'm representing the Queen's Rock Environmental Group, a community organisation promoting conservation and sustainability, working in Queen's Rock and surrounding areas since 1985. We have shown long shown an interest in the Flynn Drive, including significant bushland that is valued by the community. This has been shown in a community engagement in recent years. I'm also a Carrama resident and have lived in the area for over 25 years. We welcome the update on this project. While the city sees Flynn Drive upgrade with growing urgency, so is action on climate change and retention of our biodiversity. Protecting biodiversity is a critical challenge. Current approaches are having limited effect, and more needs to be done to retain the habitat in the city of Wanneroo. The report being presented to Council this evening indicates that the current advertising within the 400-metre radius and communication by the city of Wanneroo is not only inconsistent, it's not working. However, we welcome the city extending the engagement period for 2 weeks and increasing the distribution of letters to residents. While we note that recommendation as per item 4 that the city has obtained approval from the Department of Water Environmental Regulations, the clearing permit stipulates minimising the clearing of vegetation and trees. We also welcome the city reducing from 80 to 70 to be able to retain many of the mature trees. And also the civil contractor having to confirm the preservation of additional trees and adjustment to the location of the shared path to retain trees as per letter dated the 27th of June from the City of Wanneroo Manager Infrastructure Capital Works. The retention of mature trees along shared paths provides shade for community members, a practical strategy that can reduce the health impact on people being exposed to the sun. There are shared paths in the City of Wanneroo with minimal mature trees to provide shade, for example, Pinjar Road and Wanneroo Road. We look forward to seeing many more mature trees being retained along Flynn Drive. A material or growth-orientated approach drives biodiversity loss and climate change. Community dialogue and practical efforts need to find ways to provide employment and protect our environment. Business as usual focus on growth is not working. Retaining these beautiful mature trees along Flynn Drive, along shared paths to provide shade, to address the extreme heat, and in line with the City of Wanneroo's tree canopy cover. We also welcome the commitment of landscaping along the new road. However, to continue for this road reserved to act as a local ecological linkage, the landscaping should be of a higher standard than what has been implemented at the eastern end of Flynn Drive. We also welcome the city collecting the seeds and plants and so forth, use only locally indigenous species in landscaping. This is important to prevent the spread of non-local plants into the adjoining conservation area and to accommodate the movement of local pollinators and other small animals along the linkage. And we also really welcome members of the Queen's Rock Environmental Group having an opportunity to help with identifying and marking trees to be retained within the roadwork footprint. Considering the extent of vegetation clearing associated with this project, we appeal that the city seriously consider changing how infrastructure projects are delivered to reduce the cumulative impacts on the local communities and the environment. The current material growth oriented doesn't work. And finally, the mental health and psychosocial consequences of environmental change is contributing to emotional distress and mental health problems across many communities, which is widely publicised. All these changes are having a significant impact on human, physical and mental health and need to be taken into consideration at a local level, state, nationally and internationally. And finally, as a Carramar community member, I welcome the retaining of the left hand outside of Tranquil Drive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Klonowski. My next speaker this evening is on item 4.10, Flynn Drive duplication, Mr Sean Williamson. If you'd like to come down and give us your name and suburb you live in. Thank you, Mr Williamson.
Thank you, council members. My name is Sean Williamson. I'm a local resident of Carramar, 71 Bushland Retreat. I'm just here tonight not to oppose a duplication of Flynn Drive. I think that's well overdue and quite a road that needs upgrading. However, I would actually, like Tracy and Tom just mentioned, obviously if we take some consideration into the trees and the bushland in the local area, we've already lost a significant amount of bushland with the development of the Kilma Estate around that pocket. So, you know, with that duplication of the road, I hope that can be considered. However, I would like to talk about the impact of the Tranquil Drive entry point. We believe, and we've talked to a number of residents, that it's actually really going to open up severe traffic implications. It is a semi-rural area. It's very quiet streets. We've got no street lights. The roads are very quiet, comfortable for the residents to walk around. It's not only local residents in that current area, It's actually residents from the inner Carramar area. We all enjoy the Tranquil Park. The road's called Tranquil Road for a reason. It's not called a thoroughfare road or, open road for people to take a quick shortcut through. And we believe that this may happen once that road opens up. There's no footpaths, as I say. We do like the state. There's no footpaths, there's no roads, but obviously there's a lot of local kids in the area that use that road to get to and from school buses and for their morning walks, and all the rest of the residents on their own visiting Tranquil Park and walking around the area. So basically I'd just like to ask for the council to give some thought into that process and potentially leaving that road as it is and keeping that little pocket, that very unique pocket that we have in that area that's surrounded by a lot of now industrial area, large residential area, to keep its uniqueness and to allow that to sort of just carry on the way it is without opening up to a lot of traffic that is non-residential. Thank you very much.
Mr. Williamson. Thank you for your deputation. I have another deputation from Mr. Damien Maloney about item 4.5, the local development plan. Thank you, Mr. Maloney. If you'd like to come down to the podium, give us your name and your suburb of address, please.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken and councillors and administration officers. My name is Damien Maloney. I'm a director of Eglinton Estates Proprietary Limited. I live in Salter Point. Eglinton Estates owns a number of large englobo land holdings in Eglinton, including the Eglinton District Centre, Lot 805, and Amberton Beach, which is being developed in an alliance with Stockland. Eglinton Estates submits the proposal to increase the retail floor space within the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre should be rejected by Council. The report prepared by administration does not adequately address the negative impacts this proposal will have on the Eglinton District Centre. Let me start by looking at the big picture, as it is very easy to become bogged down in the technicalities of the documents attached to the agenda item. The activity centre plan for the Eglinton District Centre was unanimously endorsed by this very council and was then approved by the WAPC in May 2021, just over 2 years ago. The approved Eglinton District Centre Activity Centre Plan is approved to provide 2 full-line or major supermarkets within the Eglinton District Centre, that is Coles and Woolies, together with a small format supermarket, for example, Aldi or IGA. The Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre, under the Eglinton Agreed Structure Plan number 82, is approved to provide a smaller format supermarket, such as Aldi or IGA. If this proposal is approved by Council, one of the full-line supermarkets will be removed from the Eglinton District Centre and moved to the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre. Such a move waters down the district function the Eglinton District Centre has been approved to perform. This has the effect of delaying the development of the first full-line supermarket within the Eglinton District Centre until 2029-2030, on the basis that a population of around 8,000 is required to sustain the development of a Coles or Woolworths supermarket. The existing population of Eglinton is now almost sufficient to sustain a Coles or Woolworths supermarket. A second Coles or Woolworths supermarket, if one goes to the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre, will not be sustainable until the population reaches around 16,000, projected to be 2029-2030. At a time when the Eglinton station is scheduled to open in April 2024, delaying development within the Eglinton District Centre until 2029-2030 by approving this proposal just does not make sense, especially when this proposal is not in accordance with the approved activity centre hierarchy. The proponent is proposing to increase the net lettable area of the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre from the approved 2,051 square metres to 3,250 square metres, an increase of 1,199 square metres or 58%. Relative to the function the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre is approved to serve within Eglinton, this is a significant increase and clearly detracts from the district function the Eglinton District Centre has been approved to perform. There are a number of inconsistencies in the administration report which I'd like to draw your attention to. Page 82, administration elevates the land uses in a neighbourhood centre to be the same as in the Alkimos Secondary Centre and the Eglinton District Centre by stating the desired land uses in a secondary centre are the same as in neighbourhood centre and a district centre. This is clearly not correct. The land uses in a district centre and especially in a secondary centre such as Alkimos are much more diverse than in a neighbourhood centre. Page 83, we had not seen the revised retail impact test until the agenda for this meeting was released on the weekend. We would appreciate being given time to consider this document, seeing the first test document was based on an incorrect net lettable area of 2,500 square metres for the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre, as pointed out by our consultants in our submission. Page 85, the administration refers to the transfer of 468 square metres of net lettable area from the mixed-use zone fronting Eglinton Boulevard to the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre, which when added to the existing allocation of 2051 square metres, gives a total net lettable area of 2519 square metres. This transfer is justified by the proponent by saying the mixed-use land is not viable. I question not only the validity of a proponent in being permitted to transfer retail floor areas in this manner, but also the administration for endorsing such an approach. The characteristics of the end users in a mixed-use zone are very different to the end users in a neighbourhood zone. Page 86, the City engaged MGA planners to consider the proposed impact the increase in NLA, net lettable area, in the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre would have on the Eglinton District Centre. MGA concluded the proposed increase will have a short to medium impact on the timing of delivery of the Eglinton District Centre. This is consistent with modelling undertaken by our consultants Tactics 4 and our previous consultants Urbis, that development within the Eglinton District Centre will be delayed until 2029-2030 if this proposal is approved. Page 87, administration advises the proponent has confirmed that the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre will not deliver a full-line supermarket. We request that if the City is inclined to support this proposal, that a condition be imposed that a full-line supermarket is not permitted to be constructed on this site, true to the word of the proponent. This can be done by limiting the size of any supermarket to 2,500 square metres, including back-of-house area referred to in the Praxis report. We have been in discussion with Coles and Woolworths. They have advised us they've been putting in proposals on the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre, so you can see it's a facility that's actually replacing what should go to the Eglinton District Centre. The City actually states that a full-line supermarket typically has a net lettable area of 3,000 square metres, making it probable and likely that a Coles or Woolworths supermarket will be developed if the NLA for this site is increased to 3250. It will be a full-line supermarket taken from the Eglinton District Centre. Page 87, administration admits that the expansion of the delivery that the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre will cause a delay in the delivery of the Eglinton District Centre. Our consultants advise this delay will be to at least 2029-2030, even though the station is due to open April 2024. Page 88, administration states that it is of the view that the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre is not likely to be viable given its proximity to the Eglinton District Centre. Apart from querying the qualifications administration has to make this claim, administration's response is to make the neighbourhood centre viable by increasing the net lettable area at the cost of the Eglinton District Centre without due regard to the viability of the Eglinton District Centre. In conclusion, we challenge the conclusions administration has arrived at. Namely, administration has concluded this proposal does not undermine the established and planning activity centre hierarchy. This is not true. There is a very clear activity centre hierarchy provided for by a number of documents: State Planning Policy 4.2, Eglinton Agreed LSP, Eglinton District Activity Centre Plan. This proposal will move a very important district centre function to a neighbourhood centre, thereby undermining the approved Eglinton District Centre Activity Centre Plan. We also challenge administration's conclusion that this proposal does not result in a deterioration in the level of service to the local community. This is also not true. Rather than the Eglinton District Centre fulfilling a genuine district function, the district facilities the local community needs to access will be located in two places, not one district. We don't agree with the administration conclusion that this proposal does not undermine public investment in infrastructure and services. Delaying the development of the Eglinton District Centre until 2029-2030 certainly undermines the investment the state government has made in the Yanchep rail extension, with a station in Eglinton scheduled to open in April 24. Eglinton Station incorporates an important bus interchange and commuter park and ride parking areas. These works present significant public investment which will be detrimentally impacted if this proposal is approved. And we also don't agree with the administration's conclusion that this proposal is consistent with the objectives and outcomes of the State Planning Policy 4.2. Clearly, it can be seen from the above these objectives laid out in this policy have not been met by this proposal. I thank Council for the opportunity to address it and commend Council to refuse this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Maloney. We have our last deputation this evening on item 4.7, the Dale Cross petition, from Mr Edmund Parker. Mr Edmund Parker, would you like to come to the podium, give us your name and the suburb you live in? Thank you, Mr Parker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My concerns are for the traffic in Dale Cross Avenue. Now, since the opening of Russell Road onto Hartman, there's been a decided increase in traffic. Mainly, I believe, they're looking for a shortcut through to Wanneroo Road instead of going down to the lights of the one further north. In early 2000, it became aware to me that this was going to take place, that the opening to Hartman, and so I took it upon myself to do a canvass of with a petition in Russell Road, which was presented to the Shire, and Russell Road got, I think, 3 speed humps, and including one very large one, which they definitely have to slow down at. We received in Dale Cross Avenue very little as far as speed humps goes. One situated close to Wanneroo Road. It only interferes with the speed or traffic of those smaller or narrow wheelbase vehicles. Once over it, it's open road. Some 4 years ago, I received in the mail from the Shire engineers a plan to construct a speed hump in front of number 23, Dale Cross Avenue. I showed it to the owner, who phoned the Shire, and he was advised by the person he spoke to that, oh, we thought your driveway was in the side street. Now, that speed hump didn't proceed. What we are now proposing to the engineers is that proposed speed hump be placed further west on the between the boundaries of number 19 and 20. There have been no objections from those residents near to the speed hump being implemented. And that's what we're asking for now, for it to be considered. My deep concern is for those 12 or 13 children in that stretch of street, and within some 200, 220 metres, a number of them are preschool, some of them are barely out of three-cornered pants. So that's what our question is tonight, and we'd like it to be considered. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr Parker. That's all of our deputations for this evening, and we will proceed to reports. Item 4, if there's any declarations of interest by council members, including the nature and extent of which the interests are to be made at the commencement of the item to which the interest relates. Declarations of interest forms are to be completed and handed to the Chief Executive Officer. So, planning and sustainability. Thank you, Mr Dixon, Mr Bowring and Mr Van Leyman. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. There are 5 items from the Planning and Sustainability Directorate on tonight's agenda. I would like to introduce items 4.1 and 4.5, and Mr Van Heiningen will briefly introduce items 4.2. We're happy to take questions on the other items, Mayor. With regard to item 4.1, this report covers a proposed scheme amendment to introduce operational periods for the developer contribution plans for the East Wanneroo cells 1 to 9. New State Planning Policy 3.6 deals with developer contributions and requires that local governments must assign an anticipated lifespan for each developer contributions plan by April 2024. The old East Wanneroo cells 1 to 9 were prepared over 20 years ago and did not include an operational period. A scheme amendment is therefore required to introduce an operational period. Administration has prepared a table on pages 2 and 3 of your agenda that outlines for each cell the percentage area remaining to be developed, an estimated completion date based on our draft capital expenditure plan, and a proposed closure date. You will note that we have added a contingency period for each cell. Most have a contingency of 4 years to allow for unforeseen delays in the construction of remaining infrastructure and the acquisition of public open space. Cell 1 has a contingency of 1 year, as we are close to finalising the purchase of the last area of public open space, and Cell 5 has a 2-year period because of a similar reason. We will make every endeavour to close the cells as soon as possible, and hopefully we will be doing so before the operational dates. Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Miles, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Cells, my favourite subject for Mr Dixon. On your in your report on page 2, and I'm just going to go for that one because it's easier, with the table 1 that's there, cell 1, you've got pending finalisation of POS acquisition. Now, the last time I looked at the cell acquisitions required, there was some, administration believes there was some land to be purchased down off Ashley Road or near about Jimbub Park. Is administration sure that that land has to be acquired? Because the owners I've spoke to are not expecting any money from the city at all.
Mr Dixon.
Mayor, I'll take that question on notice because I haven't been party to, my offices have been involved in recent negotiations, but I will take that question on notice and provide a full response for Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do we have any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah. The other parts of my question are some of the, and I know in the report you talk about aligning some of these timeframes up to what the state government is attempting to do with new cell costs. But some of the timeframes are very extensive. 2033, 2035 on a couple of them. With those timeframes, if for whatever reason the landowners haven't subdivided or moved on with their proposals, how is administration then going to deal with any future costs that need to be provided, bearing in mind that if the cell's no longer available, the city's probably not going to be able to collect any further money?
Mr Dixon?
So what we're proposing here, Mayor, is an estimated operational period. If we don't complete the necessary infrastructure or acquire the public open space, there would be a need to extend the operational period of the cell in order to finalise that key infrastructure. So this is an estimate of the timeframe that we would be hopeful to complete the acquisition of open space and the delivery of the infrastructure. If it doesn't eventuate, we'll require another scheme amendment. As indicated in my presentation and in the report, what we have done is give a best guess as to the timing of the delivery of that, but we've added a contingency of, in most cases, 4 years, because we all know that in the experience of managing developer contribution plans, they don't always go exactly as we anticipate. So by allowing that contingency of 4 years, it gives us some scope to try and work with proponents to deliver the infrastructure. And we are confident of being able to do that. Most of the cells are reaching the end of their natural life.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do you have another question, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess just to finally, what I'm trying to understand also is if our cells are at 98% or near enough to that level of completion, or even if they're at 60% completion, but the city's already acquired any POS, any paths and all the rest of it, apart from just keeping it over to keeping them open, keeping a cell open just to acquire further monies off of future developers, which could take forever, what is the state's process? Because I know they're going through their new DCP and they're saying they need to be 10 years and then you're supposed to roll them over in some capacity. Are we aligning this to that policy to try and make it easier to quit the cells because it's costing money to keep them open rather than just say, well, we're not going to get any further money as a city, we might as well just let the landowners benefit?
Mr Dixon.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Rest assured, councillors, that administration's intention is to work proactively to close these old developer contribution plan cells as soon as possible. You'll note in the report that for each of the cells there was still either outstanding acquisition of open space or infrastructure. You'll also note on page 3 of the report we have outlined our intention to introduce a procedure on how we will go about finalising and closing the DCPs. At the moment, there is nothing in your scheme provisions around the procedure to close the DCPs. They're very old in the provisions, and they don't have any provision that enables us to do so until the very last area of land is subdivided. That isn't in alignment with SPP 3.6, and that's why when we get close to winding up some of these cells, we'll work with council to introduce some criteria and procedures around how we will go about finalising that. But that will be based on once we've completed all of the necessary infrastructure, once we've completed all of the acquisition of the open space, so there's no risk to council in managing those DCPs.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Civic, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I guess Councillor Miles has asked quite a few of the questions I wanted to, but my question is based on 5 of the cells, which are in the order of 3% to 10% or 11% completion. The actual timeframes that has been suggested, I'm thinking is, for me, quite long, on the basis that several or many ratepayers who were individual developers, etc., have asked me when they were going to be completed and tidied up. And I would have thought that administration could tidy these up a lot earlier than as far out as 2033. I guess most of these people are getting older now and would like to see them tidied up, but appreciating the report's a good report. Is there, and you do intimate that you're going to try to wind them up as quickly as possible, on the basis of the smaller ones at 3 or 10 or 5%, will administration be looking at actually creating different conditions for these ones to actually tidy them up and move on, considering we're still holding sufficient funds of the developer contributions within council budgets and assets and money? Thank you.
Mr Dixon.
And again, through you, Mayor, as I reiterate, administration's intention is to try and finalise these DCPs as soon as possible. They are obviously challenging to administer, and we have proactively worked with landowners in the remaining cells to acquire either historic public open space or new public open space, and proactively work towards trying to deliver the infrastructure as soon as possible. You'll also appreciate that compulsory acquiring land to deliver infrastructure can be challenging and time-consuming, as we've experienced in a couple of our cells. So we've got to be balanced in our approach. What we do in the report is estimate the completion date, which is what we're optimistic in achieving, but adding the contingency. So realistically, the contingency is there just in case things don't go as planned. That's not to say that that will be the date that the DCP closes. If it can be finalised much sooner, then that's exactly what we will recommend to Council.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Are there any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one question from me. What does administration require of Council to bring some of these dates 2 to 3 years forward in regards to resourcing, financials? What are the main things that are giving you these dates that have been proposed? What are the barriers, I should say?
Mr Dixon.
I'm not sure there's much more that Council can do. Administration is actively engaging with landowners to see if we can acquire land. Often landowners may not be in a position where they want to subdivide. We can't force them to subdivide their land to create lots for open space and development. So we have proactively worked with the landowners. We've proactively looked at where we can deliver infrastructure in our capital works programme, that we will deliver infrastructure where the funds are there. It's really a question of the city negotiating with the landowners to try and deliver the infrastructure and the open space as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Councillor Wright first. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, just one other question from that. So from I guess from a resident point of view, if nothing's going to change from now until that end date, how does that work? I mean, because at the end of the day, you'll reach a stalemate between, someone's not wanting to give up land, yet the long term for the city, the financials are coming out and maintaining these. So is there an end goal between, I guess, meeting halfway? Because if a resident's not willing to sell now, say come 2033 and they're still not willing to sell, what's the process then?
Mr Dixon.
Look, it's from my experience, it's better to try and negotiate the acquisition of land through the provisions that's outlined in the scheme. When you start to enter into compulsory acquisition, as we've done on a couple of occasions that Council's aware of, it often then leads to challenges through the court. One case we've had recently went to the Supreme Court and cost the DCP a significant amount of money. So I'm sceptical of advising Council to go down that route. Most of these cells are reaching the end of their natural life. There's only a few areas of open space and a small area of infrastructure that's required. We are confident that we'll start the process in the next few years to start to wind up some of these cells. Cell 1 In particular, cell 5 in Lansdale is another one which has only got a small area of infrastructure and open space to deliver. So we are confident that we'll be able to start to deliver some of the closure of these cells. Some of them require a bit longer. Cell 2 is only 42%. So it's got 42% of remaining development. But it's a long process, unfortunately. It's not a simple process, but rest assured, we're doing everything we can to try and finalise the cells as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this was a question I omitted to ask before. With regards to Cell 5, now Cell 5 has been in existence since 1975, however, not under the cell structure, and there's only 5% in that area, and I guess it's the Lansdale industrial area. My question is basically that cell probably doesn't require any historic public open space. Why are we not sort of creating a situation where any development would be paying cash in lieu rather than acquiring any public open space? Thank you.
Mr Dixon.
So for cell 5, which is in Lansdale, there's only one area of open space payment remaining, and we are in discussions and underway in terms of likely to acquire that area of public open space. Those landowners that are still to develop within the cell, we still need to work out a procedure so that they also continue to make contributions towards the infrastructure rather than make no contribution. So one area of public open space to acquire, and then we look to close the cell but introduce a mechanism to continue to collect funds for those that are still to contribute, and then return equitably the money that we collect to all those landowners who have previously contributed. So that's a cell, that's one of the cells that I mentioned that we are confident within the next couple of years we'll be able to close.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do we have any other questions on this item? If we have no more questions on this item, we go to item 4.2, the City of Wanneroo Submission Operational Policy 2.3, Draft Planning for Public Open Space. Mr Van Hannigan, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 4.2 relates to the City's response to the State Government's updated Operational Policy 2.3, which guides public open space provision in the state. The current policy is now outdated in terms of contemporary planning and development. Currently, the planning system delivers more varied and higher density development than in the past, as you know. This means more public open space is required than in the past. The updated policy aims to align the policy with current planning outcomes that we're getting. The policy maintains the current 10% POS requirement for residential subdivisions, but now also requires some subdivisions of less than 5 lots, infill development, apartments and mixed-use developments to also provide POS. Administration's recommended response is outlined in attachment 1 of the report. Administration recommends that Council welcomes the new policy, in particular the new provisions that include infill development, smaller subdivisions, apartments and mixed-use development to also provide public open space. Administration welcomes the provision that local planning strategies can vary the provision of POS for infill development in areas where there's sufficient public open space already. Administration proposes that the 10% POS requirement be reviewed by the state government and potentially be increased, noting that the 10% requirement comes from 1950s when much lower residential density was delivered. There's also a number of other issues that need to be further clarified and considered by the state government as outlined in the report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr Van Hannigan. Do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of, I guess, items that I sort of contradict in the report. On page 18 of the report, you talk in the second paragraph under proposal to maintain the minimum 10% POS, and you did indicate this a little while ago, where it says the state government's current policy is 10% minimum required POS has been in place since 1956. And it was based on a density of 30 persons per hectare. And that's fine. And further down, you're saying administration proposes that the minimum requirement is reviewed to determine if that is still reasonable proportion, that's the 10% we're talking about, reserved for POS to meet the community needs and expectations. But however, in the letter that Mr Dixon's sending in on our behalf, it sort of then starts tackling that there's not enough water to service those public open spaces. So I just found that a bit of a, not a contradiction, but we're sort of saying, should we have more POS for public use, which is most people understand that to be green parks and fields, but however, if we do get it, we can't water it.
Mr Van Hannigan.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, in terms of the water issue, as you know, that's quite a challenge for local government in terms of climate change and also reduction in water licenses. So although that's not a planning matter, that is an associated matter that needs to be considered by state government. So, but in terms of the provision of POS, the POS don't necessarily have to be irrigated. There's other ways of developing them to reduce the water needs for that. In terms of the provision of more than 10%, that relates to, the policy includes a lot of aspects which could be included in 10% POS. So private open space within developments that are accessible to the public, those can serve as a reduction to the 10%. There's also portions of public open space that have utility services such as sumps can potentially be taken off the 10%. So it does reduce, although it is 10% provision, there are certain exemptions that could reduce that 10%. And our recommendation is that the 10% be maintained, although there's different ways of actually maintaining that 10%.
Thank you, Mr Van Hannigan. You have another question, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. As part of the submissions with the POS, and I sort of support the idea of if you're going to have infill in some of our older areas like Wanneroo, Girraween and the like, and you might say, well, okay, the city can have a cash in lieu of say 5%. Does the public open space policy that the state is proposing, does that allow the city then to utilise that funds on upgrading those facilities to have more of a interactive benefit? So it might be equipment, it could be anything. It doesn't have to just be land.
Mr Van Hannigan.
Through you, Mayor, in terms of the current position, the city hasn't required public open space provision in established infill areas because the city wanted to promote infill and making sure that those areas densify. But in the future, there may be, when our greenfield areas develop, we may need to look more into that aspect to make sure that there's sufficient public open space. In terms of the policy specifies that the local planning strategy can actually vary that public open space provision. So if the city's done an audit through the strategy and maintain that there's a certain area that's got sufficient public open space, then the city can vary that and reduce that. So if the city believes that there is sufficient POS. In terms of the spending of the funds, it's quite a specific process. The expenditure needs to be approved by the Minister for Planning. And as part of that process, the WAPC considers certain criteria, including it needs to be spent in that area where the money was collected. There's also in terms of it could be included to upgrade certain facilities, but the criteria are very specific in terms of what it could be used for, but it's subject to the Minister's approval.
Thank you, Mr Van Hannigan. Are there any other questions on this item? If there are no other questions on this item, we move to 4.3, preparation of Amendment 209 to District Planning Scheme Number 2, part normalisation of the East Wanneroo Cell 1 tapping in Ashby, Structure Plan Number 3 area and revocation of Ashby Neighbourhood Centre, agreed Local Structure Plan Number 77. Did you wish to speak to that, Mr Dixon? Do I have any questions on that item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just I guess just a normal one, and I think what administration is trying to do is to get rid of some of these old, structure, well, not structure plans, but these older things lying around and normalise them as the report says. But I just wanted to ask the question on page 26, the very last dot point. You're referring to the Pineview and Joondalup lifestyle villages. They will be recoded under this proposal to private community purpose. Now, obviously, private community purpose under our zone can do a lot more than just have it as a lifestyle village. So once they've got that zone, the owners of that land could, quite conceivably, remove some of those vans and use other uses on that site.
Mr Dixon, Mr Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, the community purpose zone is slightly different to the community private community purpose, the previous zone, because of Amendment 172. So what we can do is we can provide you a list of the comparative list of the different uses on those between what we had in DPS2 before Amendment 172 and what we currently have in there, and see if there's if that raises any questions. But we feel that's the appropriate zone, and it's the zone that's set up for those range of uses. I believe the differences in the land uses are relatively minimal.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Do you have another question, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you. As somebody that's been through an issue where caravan parks were just closed down and people were ejected because they had these purpose-built park homes on there, I don't ever want to go through that again because it's traumatic. But business people of the future can acquire these villages and do whatever they wish with them. So I'm a bit cautious of changing their land use because at the moment it's very, very specific. It's very specific. So I'm just cautious and I'm assuming that they're going to be consulted before we go out for advertising anyway, if they haven't already.
Mr Bowring?
Yeah, so this would enable that process to commence for consultation, so we can notify them directly. But in terms of what the scheme will allow, we've got to go through with the new zones and the new land use categories in those zones because the scheme has now fundamentally changed in that regard. So, yeah, there might be a few differences. So providing that comparative, what was there previously, what's in the scheme now, we can show you what's changed.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Wright, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Aiken. Just on page 41 and 42, I just need some clarification from administration. On page 41, there's a environmental conservation zoning, and then on the bottom one, scheme amendment map 2, that seems to be removed and it's been changed to public open space, but it's not the same piece of land. So is that being removed as environmental conservation? And same with page 42, there's another dark green space, and then that seems to be removed on the scheme amendment map 3.
Mr Bowring.
Thank you. Though environmental conservation isn't translated in our scheme, it's not actually, that's shown in the structure plan. It's already in the scheme, so it doesn't need to be replicated in this scheme amendment.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Are there any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll go to item 4.4, which I'd like to declare a impartiality because I have a Airbnb that I run from my home, and this holiday change of use quite possibly could be an Airbnb, and there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I'll consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly when the time comes. Do I have any questions on item 4.4? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. It's a question that's featured in the report, but I just think it's worth considering. In terms of the parking constraints of the application, page 62 of the agenda proper refers to the lack of provision for on-street parking and circumstances where the holiday home was operating without approval and there were 4 customer complaints that were received. is administration able to provide any additional information? Because it talks about the complaints being received on those particular months due to obstruction of the footpath. If an investigation was occurred, were those actually sustained, those complaints?
Mr Bowring?
I'll need to take that on notice and just we can provide the background to those complaints to council separately.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Do we have any other questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My question goes similar to parking. On page 61, under the parking heading, you actually talk about, obviously, holiday houses intended for 6 persons and the like. But however, you've said on the third line up from the bottom of that paragraph, however, the driveway is only 4 metres from the garage to the boundary and does not meet the minimum length of 5.4 metres for a car bay. As a result, cars do park on the adjacent footpath, which is a big problem we have everywhere, Mr Dixon. I'm just concerned that that parking condition will impact other holiday future homes if we're going to say that driveways have to be 5.4 metres in length to their boundary. Is that what you're saying in that?
Mr Bowring?
Thank you. The requirement is to provide parking on site, so that's compliant parking bay sizes. In this case, they can provide 2 bays on site. The third bay doesn't fit; it overhangs into the road reserve. So in that regard, they haven't complied with the minimum parking on site. So when we look to relax that, if there was available effective on-street parking, then that might be a reason to vary the parking standard. But the bay is a standard size, 5.4, for a parking bay, whether it's in a commercial centre or a private use like this.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Councillor Miles?
Just further to that, if and I'm happy with the report, but if council obviously is going to do some more of these elsewhere, is council able then to put in a stipulation that the garage must be empty and not used in any way but for a car? Would we be doing that as a, I guess, planning application?
Mr Bowring?
Yes, essentially that's a requirement. So the plans show 2 bays available. They have to be kept free and unobstructed. There's typically a condition if we were to approve it to that effect.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. And just one question from me, which is also at the bottom of page 61. I note that you've put in there for the DPS2 includes parking requirements for holiday houses. For the intended 6-person capacity, the site should provide 3 car parking bays. How does that work in terms of if someone was renting it out as a family house and they've got a big van of, 6 people in it? So does the DPS2 actually take into consideration those, concerns,
Mr Bowring?
The residential design codes specify for a residential property 2 car bays, generally down to 1 in some locations, or none in inner city locations. So there's a difference between a residential dwelling. People need to decide what's appropriate for their needs. Short stay accommodation is kind of a little bit more concerned with looking at what's suitable for the surrounding area.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question for me. Just in regards to the tourism, can we just clarify exactly how close we are to our nearest tourist precinct for something like this to warrant its need? And further, just to clarify where this would go if it was a decision that was taken by the applicant to go to SAT.
Mr Bowring.
Thank you. We did identify in the report a couple of locations, such as the proximity to Mindarie Marina and the like, which is some 10 or 11 kilometres away from the site. We can provide a little bit more information if that's requested, by way of a map and identify some of those locations. We take that on notice. And in terms of the second part to that, I'm sorry, just popped out of my head. Could you SAT. Yes, there's been a number of decisions by SAT to approve, refuse short stay accommodation on a similar basis where it hasn't been in proximity to a tourism area. There was a recent one in Rockingham to that effect, and there's some previous couple of decisions along those lines as well. So it's not without precedent in terms of being upheld at SAT for refusal.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Councillor Nguyen.
There are many people who use their house for Airbnb. So are you expecting everyone to be making an application for approval?
Mr Bowring.
Yes, that's what the scheme requires. Development approval is required under the scheme for short stay accommodation.
And do you know whether the...
Councillor Nguyen, do you have another question?
I do. Do you know whether the general public is aware of that obligation?
Mr Bowring.
The general public should make themselves aware of any approval requirements, the same as you would if you were building the house in the first instance.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Councillor Nguyen, do you have another question?
You mentioned earlier if someone uses it as a short-term lease, that falls under a different category, even though it's both for residential and assessed under a different scheme. So if someone proposes, for example, for Airbnb, a maximum limit of 4 person, then theoretically, under this application, they would have been approved.
Mr Bowring?
That's essentially one of the issues, yes. Yeah, if it hadn't, you would also still be looking at the amenity impacts as well, and also the locational criteria under the framework as well.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Do you have another question, Councillor Nguyen?
I went on the website, just want to see how many rooms are in that house. Do you know how many rooms are in that house?
Mr Bowring?
I think I should be able to refer to the plans on page 69 of the agenda. There's a 3-bedroom house.
Yeah, 3-bedroom home.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr Bowring, I have a question. The statement says that 3 car bays aren't provided, but if you have a look at the house rules that are on page 72, it states that please note that a total of 2 cars are permitted at the property at one time unless otherwise arranged. That would have to be arranged with the owner of the home. No parking on the verge or neighbour's property is permitted. If with the DA, if it could be approved, I'm not suggesting that it will be or won't be, there could be conditions put on the developmental approval that would limit the number of car bays, and that would be on the guidelines that would be distributed on the holiday accommodation site. Could that be appropriated as well? Thank you, Mr Bowring.
The management strategy is one aspect, but it's not. We would need to condition the occupancy to 4 to comply with the parking standard, and that would reduce the overall parking. That would address the parking issues detailed in the report, but we'd still need to address the balance of the criteria.
Has this been discussed with the clients or the proponents putting the DA in at all, Mr Bowring?
I will need to confirm that. I believe there was a number of discussions with the proponents, but I will take that on notice and provide further detail.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Are there any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll go to item 4.5, consideration of local development plan number 24, Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre following advertising. Mr Dixon, are you speaking to this item? Thank you.
Yes, Madam Mayor. So item 4.5 has been the subject of some deputations this evening, but it is to consider a local development plan for the Eglinton Village Neighbourhood Centre following advertising. The LDP proposes to increase the retail net lettable area for the centre from 2,051 square metres to 3,250 square metres, which is an additional 1,199 square metres. The neighbourhood centre is located east of Marmion Avenue and approximately 500 metres south of the Eglinton District Centre and future train station, 1 kilometre northeast of the Amberton Neighbourhood Centre and 2.5 kilometres north of the Alkimos Secondary Centre. The LDP has been subject to advertising and we received 5 submissions objecting to the proposed increase in retail floor space and 1 submission raising traffic and noise concerns. State Planning Policy 4.2 Activity Centres guides the City on how we are to assess proposals for increasing retail floor space. In summary, a proposal should not undermine the established and planned activity centre hierarchy. It should not result in a deterioration in the level of service to the local community, nor undermine public investment in infrastructure and services. It should not unreasonably affect the amenity of the locality or be inconsistent with the objectives and outcomes of State Planning Policy 4.2. The SPP guidelines are also very clear that competition between businesses is not a relevant planning consideration. In terms of the question, will the 1,199 square metres increase in retail floor space undermine the established and planned activity centre hierarchy? Administration's view is that it will not change the hierarchy. The proposed increase will still mean that the centre will fall within the classification as a neighbourhood centre. Objectors have argued that the increased floor space has potentially significant impacts on the development and trading performance of planned nearby centres. The retail impact test submitted by the applicant indicates that there will be a short to medium term impact on the timing of a supermarket in adjacent centres, but it will not impact the overall sustainability of the activity centre hierarchy. Administration has also considered the proposed floor space increase in the city's own retail needs assessment, and this has confirmed the above that the project turnover adjacent centres will still occur at an acceptable level. Administration is also of the view that the increased floor space will not undermine the significant public investment in the Yanchep rail extension and in particular the new station at Eglinton. Whilst it may impact timing of delivery of some retail floor space at the district centre in the short to medium term, it will not impact the overall viability of this larger centre, which will provide a much larger retail floor space and service a much larger population catchment. In summary, administration has considered the proposed LDP in the context of the key matters outlined in State Planning Policy 4.2 and concluded that whilst it may have a limited impact on the timing of the delivery of nearby centres, any impact will be temporary and there will be no long-term impact on the viability of the surrounding centres as they are expected to grow as our population grows in this corridor. Mayor, our recommendation is that the LDP be approved and that it be forwarded to the West Australian Planning Commission for their consideration. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do I have any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. So from the deputations, it seems there is a little bit of a sticking point in terms of maybe a fear that there will be a full-line supermarket developed there. Considering the proponent has confirmed that the centre will not on page 87, would that be something that the city might impose as a clause, since they've said that?
Mr Dixon.
This is a local development plan. It's not a development application. That's the stage that follows the finalisation of the approval of a local development plan. We have a significant number of existing neighbourhood centres in the city, and typically what is provided is a supermarket, and then there's a number of specialty stores. In fact, all of the neighbourhood centres within the city have that form of development. What I think is likely to happen is that there will be a supermarket provided, whether it's a full-line supermarket or whether it's a medium-sized supermarket. It still performs a role as a neighbourhood centre, which is the intent in the hierarchy for this site. So I think based on the design of the LDP, based on the information that's been provided by the proponent and also based on administration's experience, the likelihood is it will be a medium size or potentially a full line centre, but it still falls within the hierarchy of centres identified in State Planning Policy 4.2.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Actually, I was going to ask Mr Dixon if he could actually just go through some of the concerns. We've had 2 deputations, obviously, earlier tonight from both proponents. I was actually hoping that you were going to touch on those points that were being raised, especially on page 82, 87 and 88, and also the fact that the district centre will be affected, and it's indicated in the report that very same thing. Are you able to touch on those points, or do you need to take that on notice and give us some further advice next week?
Mr Dixon.
Look, I think there were a significant number of points raised in the deputation opposing the administration's recommendation. I think my preference would be to go through each of those points in detail and provide a full response, because I don't agree with a lot of the statements that were made. Administration's view is that we've done a thorough assessment of this local development plan proposal, the impact that it may or may not have in terms of impacting on adjacent centres. I think I'm confident in administration's recommendation. I'm confident in the information that was provided by the proponent, and also the independent impact assessment that the city's undertaken, retail impact assessment by its own independent consultant. So the key, I think the key issue for council's consideration next week is, in particular, is this proposal going to change the hierarchy of centres? Administration's view is that it won't. This proposal is, in the grand scheme of retail within the city, is a relatively small area of additional retail floor space. It won't change this centre to become a district centre. What it will do is, in the short to medium term, it may affect the timing of the delivery of other supermarkets in adjacent centres. But what the state planning policy clearly states is it is not the role of a local authority to interfere with competition between centres. What council's role is to consider the hierarchy of centres, the location of those centres, and ensure that there is sufficient retail needs to meet the growing population. We've done that. We think that there will be an impact on the Eglinton District Centre in the short to medium term, but overall, as the population grows, there is it won't impact on the functionality of the district centre. It will merely delay the timing of potentially of some of the development in the adjacent centres. But that isn't your role. Your role is to consider the overall hierarchy and whether the hierarchy changes, and in this context it doesn't.
Mr Dixon, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a couple more points. Has our economic team looked at that part of the component, whilst planning can't? Because obviously, as you've said, planning doesn't look at whether something is commercially or economically viable. But has the economic team looked at this proposal, bearing in mind that it is clearly by the proponent saying it's going to have a dramatic effect?
Yes,
Dixon?
I think administration did consult Mr Marmion as part of our economic development and advocacy team, and I'm happy for Mr Marmion to provide some comments.
Mr Marmion.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor. Yes, we've had a good look at this in my team. We've had a good look at the retail needs assessment, because that formed a very big part of the city's overall needs assessment that we provided as part of the local planning strategy. An extra 1,199 square metres in the scheme of things, we don't believe is going to have much of an effect on the overall hierarchy at all, or the provision of retail in the city.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Miles.
Yeah. With that in mind, and I know that administration's looking at the overall picture in that corridor. I think what was presented tonight by, I think it was Stockland, the Eglinton Group, is that we as a council approved in May of 21, I wrote it down, the district centre. So it is only 2 years ago, and I'm sure all of you guys sitting at the table helped support that view to us to approve it. I'm just trying to understand why you think that this particular district centre needs to have, as it says in your report, a 58% increase.
Mr Dixon.
I might provide an initial response. So it isn't a district centre, it's a neighbourhood centre that's been proposed as part of this local development plan. I think the proponent in looking at the local development plan has provided a justification that there needs to be a small increase in retail floor space to accommodate not just a supermarket, but also the specialty stores that would support that supermarket and also support the needs of the local community, so hairdressers, newsagents, cafes and the like, which is typically how our neighbourhood centres are provided. From my experience, neighbourhood centres are in the range of typically between 2,000 square metres and 5,000 square metres. This fits neatly within that floor space. It's not above that. Typically, district centres are between 10,000 and 20,000 square metres. This proposal in itself will not undermine the viability of adjacent centres in the longer term, which will support the population as it matures. I don't know if Mr Marmion wants to provide any further information.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Look, I think to put it into simple terms, the district centre has approval for 20,000 square metres of shop retail floor space, and the current approval for the Eglinton Neighbourhood Centre is for 2,051 square metres of shop retail floor space. So overall, if you add those two together, that's 22,051 square metres of shop retail floor space that the catchment will have access to. Plus there's also the Amberton one. But if you just take those two, an increase of 1,199 square metres of shop retail floor space to those two centres, no matter which one it would be at, is 5.44%. So the actual impact on retail turnover could not possibly be over 5.44% on any centre or any of those two centres. But in actual fact, using the retail gravity model, and that's why it's quite a complex system. There's more than those two centres, there are other centres, and the impact is distributed more widely. So my view and the view of our retail consultant, MGA planners, is that impact on turnover per square metre at the centres will be much lower than 5%. There's a rule of thumb that any impact that's 10% or more is not acceptable. So my view, over 20 years of experience in dealing with these matters, is that the impact will not be sufficiently great to warrant refusal of this LDP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Nguyen.
I think there was a suggestion earlier that if this proposed increase is not approved, the project is not feasible by the proponent. It seems like it was feasible 2 years ago. Why is it not feasible now?
Mr Dixon?
I'm not 100% sure that it was unfeasible. I think, and we'll probably get further clarification from the proponent on this and provide that for Council's consideration next week. But my understanding is that in doing further analysis and speaking to retailers within the area, that a more viable proposition would be for a slightly larger increase in floor space to accommodate a supermarket in addition to the specialty stores that would surround that centre and are typically provided in front of the supermarket adjacent to the car parking. But we will provide further clarification in liaison with the proponent.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Nguyen, do you have another question?
And I do, and look, I do look...
Do you have another question? Thank you.
I do look forward to your response to those questions from the opposition to this application. My question also, there was a suggestion that if this area was increased, then Coles would only pick one or the other to open. Can you respond to that suggestion?
Mr Marmion.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor Aitken, it's not really the responsibility of a local government to decide whether a Coles or Woolworths, an IGA or a Farmer Jack's is going to go to a local centre. Our role is to make sure that we plan the orderly distribution of retail through our activity centres. So it's very difficult for me to answer that question.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The only, I guess the other thing, in your report, you've actually suggested it as well, that there was obviously a bit of confusion over how the proponent's report was originally done. The site was supposed to only have, it was done on a 2,500 NLA area instead of 2,050 square metre NLA area, and it was brought up by Damien Maloney, but administration's obviously had to deal with the inconsistencies in the proponent's report because you've actually itemised it in here. Can you enlighten on that further?
Mr Dixon.
I think, Mayor, if you refer to the bottom of page 85 and the top of page 86 of your report, I think it does outline the discrepancy and what that was created by, which I think relates to including or not including the potential retail floor space or commercial floor space that could be generated from the mixed-use development, mixed-use zone land, which I don't think the applicant is now intending to propose, and that is then reflected in the revised praxis report, which is included as an attachment to your agenda tonight.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do you have another question, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you. Because one of the concerns I have is before my time, the city, the Mayor probably remembers this as well, but the city also approved the site further to the south past Alkimos Central, I think it's called Trinity, and that's got a Coles in there. That arrangement there is a nightmare because of the parking restrictions, moving in and out. What I'm concerned about is this site's constrictions, putting in a bigger box in place, which is quite a bit bigger. It's some 1,200 square metres bigger, and making that car parking more of a challenge for people to get in and out of, bearing in mind that on the plan that I see here, which is easier for people to see, there's still some more retail or other buildings, according to this plan, to go on the Marmion Avenue end.
Mr Dixon.
So at this point in time, we're considering a local development plan. The issue of traffic and detailed analysis of that will come through a development application, which is the next stage in the process. I think there is a fundamental difference between this and the Trinity development you mentioned, because the Trinity development lies adjacent to a school or an educational establishment and other commercial uses adjacent. So this is obviously, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively small increase in retail floor space from what was currently included in the LDP. But the detail of traffic access arrangements will be considered by administration when a development application is submitted.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, I guess just to clarify, and I understand totally that this is a development, this is an application to go before the Commission, or the Planning Commission as well. But once this goes, this council has no control over whether to limit a retail shop to, say, 1,200, 1,500 or 2,000 square metres, unless we have some sort of process in place to actually make sure that we get a localised centre. It is a neighbourhood centre, and we don't want it to be, a big Woolies or Coles. We're quite happy with more of the Farmer Jack style or IGA style business in there. I know you can't say that we're supposed to think like that, but our community wants those style of developments and neighbourhood centres, and go to the bigger centres when we need to do that. So my concern, so I guess my question coming around to it is, how do we make sure then that we can say that that big box shop that's going in there, whoever it may be, is only going to be limited to 800 or 2,000 square metres?
Mr Dixon.
So this is the process for you to consider the amount of retail floor space that's supported or not in this location. This is the process. The subsequent, once you've made that decision and on the assumption that it's then supported by the West Australian Planning Commission, then a proponent, in this case Cedar Woods, can come back with a development application that would need to comply with the local development plan and the retail floor space that's indicated within that local development plan. Any development application would need to reflect those provisions.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do you have another question,
Yes,
Councillor
thank you,
Miles?
Mayor. I guess what I'm trying to understand, and I totally understand the process, but we're talking tonight, and it's being suggested that we actually want more retail space because we want specialty shops. That's what's being suggested by everybody, but nobody's sort of saying how big that big box shop's going to be. So if there's going to be specialty shops in place, have no problem whether it's a barber's or whatever, you know, nail salon or whatever, but what is that going to be as opposed to the box shop?
Mr Dixon, Mr Marmion.
Thank you for the question. I'll have a go at answering that one through you, Mayor. Maybe if I could give an example, might be a better way to do it. So we've got a district centre at Banksia Grove. You'd be aware of the supermarkets that are in there, the various supermarkets are in there. We've also got a neighbourhood centre in Carramar on Joondalup Drive, pretty much the same road. It's a little bit further away than this example. I think it's about a kilometre between those two centres. But I think there's a Woolworths at Carramar and a Woolworths at Banksia Grove. So Carramar, as a neighbourhood centre, does still have a Woolworths. It's not a huge Woolworths, it's a medium-sized one, but there are the range in size of Woolworths and Coles are quite substantial. There's a huge range. Some of them are 2,000. There's one, I think, in the Joondalup Strategic Metropolitan Centre. It's over 5,000. So they can be big box, but at 3,250 square metres total retail, there's no way there's going to be a big supermarket at a centre that's got 3,250 cap. Especially if you take off, if there's going to be a liquor store or a bakery or a cafe, they're all shop uses. So I would be very surprised if you got a supermarket that was larger than 2,500 square metres at a shopping centre with a 3,250 square metre cap.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. And Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you. I do remember when that was done, and that was a little controversy. It did slow down the process of the Banksia Grove development, and there was a lot of angst over that as well. That particular site, the Carramar site, over-traded dramatically and caused all sorts of problems for administration in truck deliveries and the rest of it. It is an issue if you have the wrong box shop in a neighbourhood centre. So whilst I appreciate you can do that, I also appreciate what happened at Hocking as well, where that took so much of the trade away from our area shops here that shops were going broke very quickly. So as a council, we do have to make a decision that will sometimes affect other businesses, and that is the concern here. So good analogy, but I was there when they were both done and there were challenges.
And would you agree, Mr Marmion? Is that the question, Councillor Miles?
I could respond to that if that's okay, through you, Mayor. Thank you for the question. That issue is not going away in the City of Wanneroo. This is going to happen time and time and time again. Because if I could just share, we've got 7 district centres in the city. We've got 4 planned. Two more of those, including the Eglinton one, will be delivered in the next 20 years. In terms of neighbourhood centres, we've actually got 47 identified. 22 of them have already been developed, 25 planned. 12 of those neighbourhood centres are going to be developed in the next 20 years. So I appreciate the sentiment, but unfortunately you're going to have this problem for the next 12 neighbourhood centres that come before you.
Mr Dixon?
I also want to reiterate and re-emphasise that the point that I made earlier, that the state planning policy guidelines are very clear that competition between businesses is not a relevant planning consideration. Your role in council is to consider holistically the hierarchy of centres and make sure that there's a right hierarchy of local, neighbourhood, district, secondary and strategic metropolitan centres in the city of Wanneroo to service the needs of its local community as it grows. It isn't to arbitrate between competition issues of one centre over another. It's to look at the holistic impact, and the state planning policy is very, very clear in that regard.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Miles?
I will finish with this point, or not a point, a question. I wasn't going to, but I guess, and I couldn't find it in the report, you're focusing on the fact that you're calling it a neighbourhood centre. It clearly says that. So how big can I build a neighbourhood centre?
Mr Dixon?
I think the state planning policy refers to a hierarchy of centres, and it also includes criteria that defines what a typical district centre, neighbourhood centre would be. There used to be a retail floor space cap in the state planning policy, but that was removed. So, and it used to be, according to Mr Marmion, it used to be 4,500. Typically, our experience, as I mentioned before, for neighbourhood centres is between 2,000 and 5,000 square metres. Some are slightly larger, some are slightly smaller. This very much fits within that figure, if you like, but that isn't the test. The test is really the, and I can give you more information on that, but the test is based around, just bear with me a second, the role and attributes, indicative service population area, transport connectivity and accessibility, land use, urban form, and so on. So there isn't a figure that I can give you to say how large can we go to. It's based on those criteria, if you like, an assessment against them. But this, in our experience, very much falls within the categorisation and hierarchy as a neighbourhood centre.
Thank you, Ms Dixon. Councillor Nguyen, did you have a question?
And one of the criteria is to assess the impact on the established and planned activity district centre. In the report on page 85, where the retail impact assessment indicated that there would be a reduction in the sales at the district centre to $67.2 million per year, down from $116 million per year. So on average, you're looking at a loss of about $50 or so million per year. Now, to me, that's 42% impact. To me, that's quite a significant figure, which would subsequently affect investment within that district centre. Do you consider that to be a significant impact?
Mr Marmion.
I would consider that a significant impact, but that was the impact that was submitted by the submitter, so not by the applicant or by the city's independent retail specialist.
Councillor Nguyen, do you have another question?
Yes, I think the following page indicates there is also an impact, but it's expected to recover by 23%. I think that's on the second last paragraph.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, as I said before, the maximum impact by adding 1,199 square metres could not possibly be more than 5.44% on the district centre, even taking a simple look at it.
Do you have another question, Councillor Nguyen?
The increase is not actually 5.4%. The increase is actually over 50% of the existing centre.
Through you, Mayor, the increase is 1,199 square metres of shop retail. adding to the well, there's nothing existing there at the moment, adding to the planned 20,000 square metres at the district centre and the planned 2,051 square metres at the neighbourhood centre. So that's an increase of 5.44% of floor space overall.
Councillor Nguyen, do you have another question? Mr Dixon, I just have a question. Do you know the estimated building time of the Eglinton Centre and the neighbourhood centre and the district centre at this point in time, if both of the centres remain as what they are in the current district structure plan?
Mayor, I'll take that question on notice and I'll seek clarification from the proponents of those centres.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Are there any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll go to assets. Thank you. Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. From Assets Directorate, we have 6 items on the agenda tonight, and I'm not intending to introduce those reports. I'm but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Do I have any questions on item 4.6? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got 4 questions on this particular item. My first question is in regards to formal road safety inspections. What is the criteria, what elements are assessed and what factors are considered in that inspection?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. It looks at the road geometry, the conditions of the surrounding area, environmental factors, and the traffic safety aspects, any crashes, and then what are the risks which are identified at particular site which require mitigation.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Rai.
Can I have a 1A? Just in regards to that, is that inspection taken by the city or by main roads?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Normally, it depends like what it's classed as. A road safety inspection is undertaken by qualified traffic engineers. But if it's a formal road safety audit, that has to be done by qualified road safety auditors. Normally, it's a team of 3. One, normally the proponents of that particular, or the managers of the site, main roads, and a independent auditor.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. My second question is in regards to the Elliott Road project. My understanding through our budgeting process and the wording all along the way has been an upgrade of the intersection in our long-term financial plan and also in our capital work programs. Why are we being presented with minor works and a slip lane into Elliott Road, which is not a full modification of the intersection, which has received a number of very high number of crashes, 37.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. As part of our analysis, we look at what's the issue we are trying to treat and what's the possible solution. So at this point in time, we identified that this solution is likely to address the risk at that particular intersection, which is the provision of a dedicated left slip lane. The crash data suggests that the majority of the crashes are occurring for the traffic turning right out of Elliott and also traffic turning left into Elliott. So there is not enough slip lane there. So they're either happening rear-enders or basically the traffic turning right out is hitting the cars on a side-on. So they are the main 2 issues we are trying to treat by implementing this concept.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you for that. My third question, which is on page 161, why hasn't administration consulted with the local residents, which has been indicated on there? Because I know residents are very unaware of this proposal and certainly, I guess, would add some value and comments to this intersection, I guess, into what other changes are needed, as I know the Shorehaven project has already been consulted with local residents.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Generally, with the black spot applications we make, they are made 18 months ahead of when they fall into the budget. So these applications are for 24-25 capital works program. So the community consultation is generally undertaken when design is being developed. At this stage, the applications contain the concepts and what the treatment options are. So in case of Wanneroo Elliott, the consultation with the community will be undertaken once we are reasonably sure that application is likely to be approved through the process. And then we'll undertake consultation with the community, and also at the same time, we'll have a better design to present to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Sorry, Mayor, just on the Shorehaven Boulevard project, that project is already on Capital Works program for the city, in the long-term Capital Works program. So we have, in the meantime, identified there's an opportunity for us to seek funding. So that's the reason consultation has already occurred while we're exploring the opportunity to get some extra funding.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. Just my last question, it probably come up with some of the other councillors, but I noticed this item 4.8 and 4.11 have all been submitted prior to council consent. Was there any reason why that this wasn't brought to us earlier? Because I know these are annual programs, the timeframes are known to administration, and why in regards to these, or a special meeting was not called to deal with these in a timely fashion?
We're talking to 4.6, not 4.8. You just mentioned 4.8.
Yeah, 4.6, 4.8 and 4.11 are all submissions to agencies that haven't received council consent for any of them. So I just wanted to ask it in one question instead of 3 times.
Okay, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for relating to 4.6, the report does mention that we have to consider the crash data for last 5 years, and data gets updated earlier in the calendar year through main roads. So that, and then the call for this application comes from main roads around January, February. The timing-wise, it does take time for us to consider which projects will qualify the criteria. Criteria does change slightly from year to year. So rather than having applications sitting there which may not meet the criteria, which is released every year, so we assess the intersections which are likely to meet the criteria, and then which we can treat within a reasonable time, which means that a financial year after that one. So that does not allow us enough time to bring a report to council before submitting the applications. So what we do is we look at a priority, look at the chances of success of application being successful. We make the application subject to council endorsement. Can I just also add, the state and national black spot program does not require council endorsement of these submissions. It is done by administration, but we have a practice that we do bring it, given that council has interest in these projects, we do bring this report to council every year after we make the applications.
Mr. Singh, I have a question. Criteria, is this on a policy or a procedure that's been previously approved by council, which gives you delegated authority to put these applications in?
So you made, generally, as I said earlier, for black spot program, we don't need council endorsement. The city administration can apply for these projects. As a practice, we do inform council and present that to council for endorsement given the level of interest. The item 4.8, which comes a bit later on, which Council Wright has referred to, that does require council endorsement of those submissions. Again, the timing-wise, we don't have enough timing between the call for applications, release of criteria, and preparing the applications to seek council endorsement. That's why we submit the application so we don't lose the opportunity and then seek council endorsement afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Any other questions? Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Councillor Wright referred to Elliott Road, Wanneroo Road, as having 37 accidents. Over what period of time have those accidents occurred? Because, I mean, I've lived in Wanneroo for a long, long time, and I didn't think that they would have been over the last year or two. So it must be over a longer period of time. Thank you.
Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. The crashes which we analyse are for a 5-year period to December last year.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Are there any other questions to item 4.6? To item 4.6, we'll go to item 4.7, response to petition PTO 2-6/23, requests for traffic treatments, Dalcross Avenue, Madley. Do I have any questions? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. Just one question. Subject to the recommendation being endorsed next week, the administration refers to locating the speed advisory trailer. Is there any preferences to the location of that? Because I can probably offer some comment as to say that the location last time situated right near the intersection of Wanneroo Road, I don't think was particularly useful. So I don't know if administration has a preference in mind for where that location may be, subject to council approval.
Mr. Singh?
So you may know we can assess that again and find the appropriate location where it's likely to have most impact. The challenge we normally face is when we're placing these trailers is the drivers in that any street for that matter. So we'll try to find the safest location where we can place it and still have maximum impact.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Whilst I'm comfortable where the actual speed humps near Wanneroo Road are at the moment, Mr. Parker was referring to getting better speed control devices further on, but I can't see where. But if these speed humps were to be moved, is there a location that they could be put? Because between the next roundabout up is probably only about 200 metres. So there's be a lot of speeding done between there. I was just thinking, is there anywhere else that they could be moved to without really hindering any of the residents?
Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, this stretch of the road is quite challenging from that point of view. We got, between the roundabout and Wanneroo Road, we got 3 intersections, 2 to the north, 1 to the south, and there are about, I think, 20 plus drivers. That creates a challenge by itself. We can't place these speed cushions in front of anybody's driveway. We had to find a spot, and also it had to have illuminated as well. Street light has to be available. So there are a number of things we need to consider. During the deputation, Mr. Parker referred to, I think they're looking at between 19 and 20. I can see from the aerial plan there's drivers on both sides. So it's going to be quite challenging to relocate these existing speed cushions.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Any other questions to this item? Councillor Civic.
When this item first came to council some time ago, I think I did ask whether whether council would have a look, or administration would have a look at the Susan Road stretch of road to the Dale Cross roundabout, and I was just wondering whether any studies were done on that, because people still, I would suggest from Nangara Road through to the shops at the roundabout there, they tend to speed a lot more than what they would in Dale Cross Avenue. That is my view, because I live close, yeah.
Would you agree?
I would agree.
No. It's a briefing. Is that your question? Would you agree, Mr. Singh?
My question was actually, was any study done as part of the actual original one when it was actually first submitted? Yes.
Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. When this item came to council last, I think it was I'm trying to find that date, 2020. We did look at, after that, as per council decision, 4 roads, Russell Road, Susan Road, and Langford Boulevard. They were the streets which council asked us to look at. All those roads are within the 85th percentile speed at that time, and after when we did the analysis, is within the close to 50 kilometer range. One of the Dale Cross was the only one with a higher end. And all those roads, we assessed them under local area traffic management policy. None of them met the criteria for traffic treatments. I did circulate a briefing note to council members after we completed that work. If council members are interested, I am happy to circulate that again.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Do I have any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Nguyen.
Yes, I'd just like to foreshadow an amendment to that item. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen. Any other questions to that item? If there are no more questions to that item, we move to 4.8, Metropolitan Regional Roads Program. Do we have any questions to that item? Got no questions. We move to item 4.9, Infrastructure Capital Works, tender number 23058, renewal of play equipment, softball and installation of shade sail structures. Do I have any questions on that item? Councillor Miles.
Thank you. Just a clarification. Didn't see it in the report, Mr. Singh. The shade sails replacement and or new, what is the lifespan or guarantee that we're getting from the person that's providing those shades?
Mr. Nicholson.
Yeah, let's take it on notice, Madam Mayor, to confirm that lifespan. I'd be expecting up to 10 years, but I'd take that, as I said, and just double check.
Thank you, Mr Nicholson. Any other questions on this item? If there are no questions on this item, we go to item 4.10, Flynn Drive duplication, community engagement results and next steps. Do I have any questions on that item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions I have, which I know that this is a notation of the community consultation. My first question is, with some of the turrets and that are in the corridor that we need to place the road infrastructure, I know infrastructure is trying to get them either the road to align to move the road so it goes around or around in the middle of a tree. Are we restricted by the road reserve as a whole? Have we got enough land there that we can try and, I mean, I know that means knocking over other bush, but in some cases to save some of the trees and leave them in the middle, what sort of span have we got for the road, the width?
Mr Nicholson.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Look, this question and concern has been raised right from the beginning, and our brief to our consultants was obviously to come up with the optimal design, because there's road standards, design standards that you have to also accommodate. So the reduction of the speed limit along this road to 70 kilometres an hour would help facilitate maximum protection of all the trees along that section of road.
Thank you, Mr Nicholson. Any other questions to this item? Councillor Miles.
So I'll narrow my question a little bit. Have we got a fixed amount of land that we can build this road in? Is the corridor, I know it's a narrow corridor and we can only move the road a certain distance, and you've explained to lower the speed, I think, to 70 allows you to put a different bend in the road, especially up the Carramar Road end. There's no scope for acquiring any further land?
Mr Nicholson.
Thank you, Mayor. The road reservation was identified, I think, in the previous structure planning and approvals. So we are limited by the extent of road reserve. The land acquisition which has been undertaken in accordance with that. So we got a road reservation is fixed, and we are trying to accommodate road design within that road reserve.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. One of the deputations earlier tonight, I think it was Tim, he asked the question of whether or not further sand abatements could be put in place and then bushes placed on top of that. Is administration looking to support that sort of help with noise pollution and obviously to help the corridor blossom for the bird life?
Mr Nicholson.
Yep, we've engaged with Mr Scarrett and we've already considered his request, and we'll be meeting up with him when the project gets underway just to confirm the extent of that bunt work that will be done. So that will be undertaken. Just wanted to make a comment through you, Madam Mayor, that the dual-use path has been, the design layer has been modified to accommodate trees, which before I was speaking in terms of the main road itself, but in terms of the dual-use path, that's been, as I said, aligned to accommodate trees where possible.
Thank you, Mr Nicholson. Councillor Miles.
And the final, I guess the final talking point that's been around, and I remember when I was here in 2007, Tranquil Drive was a big issue, and it's why council turned it into a left only and shut down the right-hand turn. There was a lot of rat running being used through Carramar Road and Tranquil Drive. Has administration come up with the final plan to leave the intersection as is, as a left out only?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's absolutely correct. Through the engagement, we took out some additional engagement and received an 80-20% response in retaining the configuration as it currently is.
And
Thank you, Mr Nicholson.
Sorry, Mayor. And just to clarify on that, because whilst it is that at the moment, and that's what the residents want, there is still some people that still want to try and turn right. Is that going to be completely unable to be done I'm assuming with some island treatments, or there's the medium strip or something like that. So that can't happen in the new dualling.
Mr Nicholson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct. The road will be designed and built to prevent those actions taking place.
Thank you. I have a question. I note what Mr Sean Williamson said, that he was concerned with traffic implications at that intersection and Tranquil Drive being a rat one. Even with left in, left out, are there any considerations of minimising Tranquil Drive being a rat run, even with left in, left out, straight through there?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's only left out there, and my understanding of conversations and the project manager, this should not be an issue. However, with all new developments and road building, administration will monitor the changes to traffic flows in and around the area.
Thank you, Mr Nicholson. Any questions? Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've just got one question, and that is, obviously, once the road is done, it's going to be a quite fast-moving road. There's going to be more traffic on it. Are we still going to fence line all of the reserve areas? Especially if we use the sandbanks. So, and just to make sure that there would be fencing as well if we did use sandbanks and trees to actually use as noise reducers.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, fencing is generally not installed in road reserves unless we think there's absolute need for it. Fencing may likely to be installed. There is a Bush Forever site adjoining Flynn Drive. That site probably will have fencing to protect that site. Otherwise, road reserves are not fenced.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to further on then, obviously there are a lot of larger animals around that area. There's a lot of kangaroos. Are we going to fence those, or are we thinking of translocating those as well?
Mr Singh.
Through you, Mayor, at the moment, the road reserve is open road reserve at the moment. So we're not touching the existing Bush Forever sites. We're not clearing those. So I'm not sure there will be any significant impact on the fauna in those areas. So as I said earlier, if we identify which some areas need to be further protection, we could install fences. Otherwise, the road reserves will be kept open.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Do we have any other questions on this item? There are no more questions on this item. We move to item 411, Waste Strategy Directions Paper, the City's submission. Do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. On page 213 in the overall comments, I'll quote from it. So it's, the strategy should move away from specifying particular waste management options such as FOGO and support the use of available, and I think it should say and emerging technology, if I'm reading that right. So I was just wondering, has some of that emerging technology already started to arrive? And if so, what types of examples are we talking about there? Thank you.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, waste management industry is still evolving in that respect. At the moment, there are a couple of waste-to-energy plants being built to the south of Perth, one in Rockingham, one in Kunana. There is also technology is still being, as I said, in WA, is not here yet. Even the strategy, which at the moment talks about FOGO processing, there are no service providers. So what we are saying is leave that option open for local authorities to manage its waste to what's available and treat that way.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Smith, you have another question? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Mr Singh, just to clarify, and I guess that the environmental agency probably knows this, but we're contracted anyway under our agreements with the Mindarie Regional Council that they have to have our red bin. So it doesn't matter really what the state's wanting. It all has to go to MRC, and it would be up to them to plan for where that future waste would go. Is that right?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, to some extent, that's correct. The Mendari Regional Council has got, under the current constitution of MRC, our red bin waste goes where MRC directs us to take it, provided that facility is managed by MRC. So at this point in time, MRC has got only one site, which is Tamala Park landfill. So until Tamala Park landfill is full and it's not accepting any more waste, our red lid bin waste has to go to that site.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Do we have any other questions on that item? No more questions on that item. We go to community in place. Ms. Terrelink and Mr. Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. There are 6 items this evening from the Community in Place Directorate, and I was proposing to briefly introduce items 4.12, 4.14 and 4.17. So 4.12 relates to the Girraween Hub redevelopment. So council members will recall that there was a previous resolution from council that noted that we would be allocating some funding to look at the Girraween Hub precinct redevelopment, and that master plan was undertaken and resulted in 2 options for consideration. The first option was to refurbish is the word I'm thinking of, refurbish the buildings that are there in their existing locations. So that would be the Girraween Library, the Hub, the community centre, and there's also a community garden there as well. The second option was to look at combining the facilities into one facility, but still providing the same usability and improved functionality for those facilities. And when we had some conversations previously with council members, there was support for looking at option 2. So to progress the project from here, the intent now is for council to consider endorsing option 2 concept plan for the Girraween Hub Master, which emanated from the Girraween Hub Master Plan, as depicted in attachment 4 to the report, for the purposes of undertaking community consultation. In terms of the financing of the option 2 and indeed even option 1, there is no funds specifically allocated for that in the city's budget at this point in time, noting there are funds in out years for works to each of those buildings. However, the proposal is to consider the implementation of option 2 through an advocacy approach in terms of attracting external funding to allow that to occur. So this is put forward for council's consideration in terms of progressing option 2 at this point in time for community consultation, and also noting that we will develop an advocacy approach to seek external funding.
Thank you, Ms. Terrelink. Do I have any questions on this item? Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. I was keeping my powder dry for a while. If I can just begin, I've got a couple of questions. The first is just a minor correction on page 217, bottom of the page. It talks about Hainsworth Centre in Kundoola. It's in Girraween, not Kundoola. So if that could just be reflected for next week's report. The first question, Ms. Terrelink, relates to the inclusion of the last dot point in 2 on page 219, second last one. It talks about homelessness and the provision of housing. Are you able to share with us if the city has approached the Department of Communities around their appetite for social housing on the site, and also make comment about the feedback received from the community in terms of their attitude towards that proposal?
Ms. Terrelink.
Yes, through you, Mayor. As part of the development of the master plan, I understand that we did have some conversations with the Department of the Department of Communities, which captures housing. In terms of their comments, they indicated that they didn't see support at this point in time for developing housing on that site. So that is the feedback that we received in terms of the Department of Communities.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Councillor Rowe.
If that's the case, and I went to one of the consultation sessions as well and remember an overwhelming opposition to that prospect that some of the land become residential. Can I ask why at the bottom of that dot point it says this opportunity should be pursued through all avenues? Am I reading that correctly, that the city has included residential now into this option 2 proposal?
Ms Terrelink.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, that was the recommendations that came from the master plan itself. However, I believe in terms of attachment 4, there is no provision for that included in attachment 4 in terms of the concept that we're looking to go out for community consultation, noting that there is potential for the areas that are shaded kind of an orange colour for future development of that site in the future. However, certainly in terms of the blue facilities or blue-coloured facilities, it's not intended to include housing as part of that.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Councillor Rowe.
But just to confirm that attachment 4 would be going back out to the community, and it does have number 8 being in the bottom right-hand corner of the diagram, residential 2-storey.
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, we can have a look at that. It's only a proposal at this point in time, and we can certainly understand the community's expectations on that, but there is certainly a number of options for the use of that site in future.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Councillor Rowe.
Just in terms of clarifying, thank you, Mayor, in terms of clarifying the term that's used throughout the report, advocacy approach, Ms Terrelink, can you just sort of clarify for council members if that's just in terms of federal and state election funding commitments, or if there is other avenues, such as if Lottery West may be an option given the service provision that this facility would be providing?
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, yes, it would be broader than just an advocacy approach in terms of the state and federal elections, noting that I understand an advocacy plan will be coming to council in the near future on that, but it would also explore other funding opportunities as referenced by Councillor Rowe.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. Second last question, in terms of the commercial tenant and the consideration for that as part of the master planning process, I think one of the relevant considerations is that it is opposite a shopping centre, Summerfield Shopping Centre. In terms of either selling a portion of the land for commercial activity or the expression of interest process, is there potential to include conditions as part of this process so any potential business doesn't conflict with or proliferate on businesses in the immediate area?
Ms Terrelling.
Through you, Mayor, I understand that is the case. The Director of Corporate Strategy and Performance may want to confirm, but I do understand that it is possible to put conditions on.
Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. It is possible. We can look at that, but yeah, we'll have to see in due course because it's a while yet before we get to that stage.
Thank you. Any Councillor Rowe?
Thank you. My ward colleague's not here tonight, so I feel like I'm using his quota as well. Yeah. So the last question is just on page 221 in terms of the city's administration's position on an ongoing use for a library. Can I just get on the record from administration that after the conclusion of the master plan, the administration agrees that a library is an essential feature of the Girraween community going into the future?
Ms Terrelink.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, certainly as noted in the report, we recognise that, and it certainly came through the consultation, but it also comes through our feedback that we get for the usage of the Girraween Library, and certainly it is a valued service within the community. This community has a particularly high number of people from multicultural backgrounds and a number of people from backgrounds where English is the second language. So certainly the intention intention would be that we would continue to deliver some form of library services from this site.
Thank you, Ms Terling. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Nguyen.
Is it looking at increasing or at least maintaining at least the minimum area that's already there?
Ms Terling.
Through you, Mayor, yes, it is looking at retaining the functionality that currently exists for all of those user groups, so for the library, for the hub, and also for the community centre as well.
Thank you, Ms Terling. Any other questions on this item? Then number Councillor Miles.
I have to ask the question because it might have been a slip of the tongue from the director. In answer to the question, Councillor Rowe, you said some form of library service. Is it a library or is it some form of library service?
Ms Terling.
Through you, Mayor, the intention would be that it would be a library service. It may be just, I guess, tweaked to... It may be tweaked to obviously address the community needs and understand if there are some other needs within the community that can be addressed through the library service.
Thank you, Ms Terling. Any other questions to this item? If there are no questions to this item, Ms Terling, would you like to speak to the next item you wanted to speak to?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So item 4.14 is to consider the repeal and replacement of the Bushfire Brigades Local Law 2022. So as council will be aware, we did adopt on the 8th of May 2022 a new bushfires local law that replaced the outdated bushfire local law from 2001. We subsequently received correspondence from the Joint Standing Committee on Delegated Legislation asking us to amend our local law. Because of the changes that were required, what we are considering is to repeal the local law 2022 and then replace it with another local law. And we are confident that the new local law that we are proposing will address the concerns that were raised by the Joint Standing Committee. So the process from here would be that the new proposed local law 2023 we would give local public notice of the intention to make a bushfire local law 2023, whose purpose is to make provisions about the establishment and organisation of bushfire brigades. We would advertise that for 6 weeks, and then any comments that were received in response to the local public notice would be reported back to council for consideration.
Thank you, Ms Terling. I have any questions to that item? If there are no questions to that item, would you like to speak to item 4.17?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Mayor. So as council members will recall, we've previously discussed the issue of determining an area to be suitable for the exercise of horses under our animals local law, and that's at lot 124 Timely Hostess Mews. We did go out for community consultation on that public notice, and we received one response which was late, but it was in support of the proposal. So this item to council is now the next stage of the process, which is to determine, in accordance with clause 3.5 of the Animals Local Law, that horses are permitted to be exercised on lot 124 Timely Hostess Mews, and request that the CEO or an authorised person give local public notice of that. The third recommendation deals with the issue of dogs. So council members will recall that when we did consultation on horses, there were also a number of comments from the community in regard to prohibiting dogs being exercised on the same location. And in response to the concerns raised by the community, the proposal under the Dog Act is to give local public notice, the purpose of which is to prohibit dogs being on lot 124 Timely Hostess Mews at any time. So that's the essence of the report. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Terling. Do we have any questions on this item, Councillor Huntley?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to just foreshadow an amendment for that for next week.
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. Just, I guess, a couple of brief ones. It's good to see this come around, Director Terrelink. Just in time for your departure, I think it's great that you managed to get it through all of these hurdles. Well, the question I have is obviously with regard to item 3, which is the prohibition of dogs. I thought when we was discussing it, and it was also in the public domain, that if there were horses on the site, people couldn't walk through with dogs. But if there was no horses on the site, people could use it. Very similar to I think what we're doing up at Gumblossom, where we're segregating some areas off. Is that not possible?
Through you, Mayor, the arrangement at Gumblossom is actually different in that it's actually timed usage. So when the oval is in use by the schools, I think it's 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or around about those times, dogs must be on lead and can't be off the lead. It would be more challenging to try and enforce the situation if you had a situation where there were no fixed parameters in terms of when dogs could be on there or whether they're on lead or off lead. So the challenge with that would be probably the enforcement more than anything. Gumblossom Reserve is slightly different in that we have dedicated times. So you do know that if dogs are off the lead during those times, rangers know that they shouldn't be, and then they can approach the person and speak to them and let them know what the requirements are. But it would be a little more difficult to enforce that if it was only at times when horses were there, and, you know, then someone might say, well, you know, there wasn't a horse there 5 minutes ago when I bought my dog, and that type of thing. So it could be challenging to police that.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, and I appreciate that part of it. I guess the way it was put to me by some of the horse owners, some of them, when they use the bridle trails, they still they take their dogs with them, not for the dog to have a walk, but sometimes they do scare away other animals that don't scare their horses. So they're sort of a tandem sort of ride and walk. So that's my only concern is how can we accommodate that? Bearing in mind that most people in that area that use it, more likely they will have dogs.
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, we could consider it. I understand that the foreshadowed amendment or potentially alternative from Councillor Huntley will look at what that option might be.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Any more questions on this item? If there are no more questions on this item, I go to item 413, review of the coastal aquatic safety policy. Do I have any questions on that item? Councillor Miles.
Yes, quick one. I just have to go back to it because we scooted over it. What item was that? That was 14, wasn't it? 13.
4.13, page 229.
Okay. My question was, in the amended 229...
229 is the first page of the document.
Yeah. Okay. Oops. I'll get there. My question is, under the... I want to get the page for you. So, review of coastal policy 240, which is the policy with all the strikeouts and changes in it. We've actually named the 3 clubs in there instead of Surf Lifesaving WA and the volunteers, blah blah blah. We've actually named the clubs. My only question to you is, what if we want to put a 3rd or a 4th club in, or sorry, a 4th or a 5th club in? That means we've got to change the policy because we're naming clubs in the policy.
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, all of our policies are subject to review. I think it's every 2 to 3 years. So if these are the clubs, obviously, that we're aware of at the moment and who the city has partnership arrangements with. But the policy is certainly reviewed on a regular basis, as are all council policies, and it would be possible to amend the policy at that time should there be another club coming on stream.
Thank you, Ms Terralink. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, and my other question was under 6.3, which is on the same page 240, the city is obviously responsible for the closure of the beach if there are hazards, which obviously could pose a risk. I understand that. But if there's a shark sighting or an attack, does that mean rangers get called out? How does that work when it comes to the actual management of the process?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Under the city's local law, the patrol captains of the surf clubs have authorisation to make those decisions.
Thank you, Mr Clem. Any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions on this item, we go to item 4.15, response to petition PTO 1-1122, election signs on the road verges. Any questions to this item? If there are no questions to this item, I move to item 4.16, closed circuit television, CCTV and video surveillance devices policy. Do I have any questions to this item? Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick one. Regards to freedom of information, it's been a little bit of a hot topic with a couple of residents of me of late. Just wanted to find out and clarify where the public are on requesting footage instances of home break-ins and businesses. Thank you.
Ms.
Through you, Mayor. With the public requesting, we ask for the public to go through the police. So if it's been a home break-in, they'll have a police report and the police can request CCTV footage. That's the easiest way of doing it. However, should the public wish to, they can put in a FOI, Freedom of Information request, and at that stage we would look at what is in that CCTV footage and what could be released and what couldn't. But we generally recommend that people go through the police for an incident such as that and the police put in the request.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on this item? If we have no more questions on this item, we go to corporate strategy and performance. Thank you. Thank you, Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have any comments on 418. I do have a comment on 419 and also on 420, which isn't mine, but I will anyway. So I'll start with 419. In the financial statements, there's some changes to the capital budget. So I highlight that because it's an absolute majority decision. There is a grant that's come in, so we're taking that on board and then reducing some of the call on reserve. There are some minor tidy-ups, but also one that was raised at the budget meeting. There's money being found for the new project funds for needs and feasibility study for Jim Bub Swamp Park, new toilet block. Yes, so happy to take question on the financial activity statements, Mayor.
Do I have any questions on the financial activity statement? If I have no questions on the financial activity statement, do I have any questions on the warrant of payments? If there's no questions on the warrant of payments, Ms Jennings, you might as well stay there while the Chief Executive speaks to item 4.20.
Thank you, Mayor. And whilst I'm interested to hear the comment from the Director of Corporate Strategy and Performance on 4.20, I'm happy to take questions.
Ms Jennings, would you like to make a comment on 4.20?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just want to mention that we'll add another policy that needs an extension, which is for fee waiver concessions and debt write-off policy. It's taking a bit longer than we first expected for this one to be updated. Thanks. So we're asking for to the end of the year.
Thank you, Ms Jennings. Do I have any questions? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if the question goes to the CEO, Mayor, or to the Director. I guess my question is going earlier to the question I was asking about the surf lifesaving policy. If to review a policy every 2 years and the hundreds of policies that we have, that seems a bit maybe excessive as an administration tool. Should we be maybe some of those policies can go a bit further than the 2 years, Mr CEO?
Through you, Mayor, and thank you for the question. Yeah, I think there's two elements of review that is currently underway with our policies. One is further reviewing to make sure we've got a very clear line of understanding between what is a policy and what is a management procedure. And then I think in time there is an opportunity for some of our policies to be more a trigger of review based on legislative change as opposed to just a 2-year review. It is a balancing act in terms of making sure administration connects with council regularly on policy to make sure policy is current and addressing council's concerns. But I think the mandatory 2-year may be better replaced by some policies that are more triggered by legislative review, especially when those policies are enabling an outcome from a piece of legislation.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions on 4.20? Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in being completely transparent, I'll be foreshadowing a impartiality on this one next week.
Thank you, Councillor Herridge. Any other questions on this item? If there are no other questions on this item, we go to item 5, which is motions on notice. 5.1 is a motion on notice by myself about hospice services within the City of Wanneroo. 5.2 is a motion to revoke Council Resolution SCO 10823. And we have a new motion on notice request from Councillor Wright about service levels reporting. Item 6, late reports. We don't have any. Item 7, public question time. There's no one in the gallery for public question time. Item 8, confidential. Do we have any questions wanted to be discussed on item 8? Because if so, we have to close the door and go to confidential. If there are no questions on item 8, item 9, the date of the next meeting. The next special council meeting will be held at 7:15 p.m. on Monday the 14th of August to consider a confidential matter, and the next ordinary council meeting has been scheduled for 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 15th of August to be held at Council Chambers, Civic Centre, 23 Dundebar Road, Wanneroo, and I declare the meeting closed at 8:46 p.m. Thank you, councillors.